Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and today I have a very special guest that I think you're going to love. He is transforming the face of leadership with his new book, Positive Influence, the leader who helps people become their best self. Whoa, okay. Just hold on a minute, because that title certainly got my attention. If you are a listener to this show, it's got your attention too, because that is what we're all about here on the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. Developing leaders who develop others to be their absolute best selves. So obviously, when I saw the book, I knew I just had to have, his name is Glenn Parker. I had to have him on the show to share his insight and wisdom with us. So let me tell you a little bit about him, and then we'll hear from him on what it takes to be a positive influence leader. So Glenn Parker is a best-selling author of several books that address teamwork and collaboration. And with over 40 years of experience, Glenn is an internationally recognized consultant with some of the world's leading organizations in team building and organizational development. And like I said, his new book is just out. He penned it with his brother, Michael Parker. And so together, they are sharing their collective wisdom of decades of work and decades of experience. And we are extremely privileged to have Glenn on the show today. So without further ado, welcome, Glenn. It is absolutely great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Let me just make a minor correction.
Yes,
I co-authored the book with my son, Michael.
Oh, it's your son. I'm so sorry. I thought it was your brother. I'm so glad you corrected me. That's awesome. Okay, so it's a father-son
Yes,
team.
it is. Yes,
I love it. Thank you for correcting me.
You'll notice he's the good-looking one, and because he takes after his mother, so it's.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, I'm glad that you're keeping it all in the family. All right. So just to get us started, and I ask all our guests this, what is the definition of positive leadership to you? Because everybody sort of defines this a little differently.
Sure.
And I just always want to hear that from each of our guests. So what does positive leadership mean to you, Glenn?
Well, let me answer that question by telling you a story. And our book is full of stories, and we think that they illuminate the issues much more so than lists of things. So let me take you back, in fact, way back to my first job out of grad school, and my first boss, Larry, and my very first performance evaluation meeting. So I'm in the meeting's going well. Larry thinks I've done a good job. And I should just say, as an aside, that my job entailed doing research and writing reports.
Okay.
Fairly boring stuff. Okay. So I knew that what was coming up was that part of the performance evaluation that deals with your development plan. You remember that?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, at the end, it's your development plan. What are you going to do? What do you want to do going forward? So Larry, and I had prepared for this, and I had been watching and listening to the folks across the hall in leadership training. They were traveling all over the country, all over the US and Canada, doing leadership workshops. And they would come back with these stories about what happened in the workshop, and of course, great travel stories. And I thought, wow, that sounds like fun. Maybe I might like to do that. Mm-hmm. So I said to Larry, I think I'd like to try leadership training. I'd like to observe a class to see whether that's something for me. So he said, Glenn, as a matter of fact, he said, I'm traveling down south next week to do a couple of workshops in different cities, and you can come with me. However, I really can't justify your travel expenses unless you teach something.
Ooh.
So, my lips start to quiver. I say, Larry, I don't know anything. How would I teach something? So he
Yes,
says,
a little overwhelming. Nothing like diving in at the deep end, is there?
no, that's right. So he says to me, Glenn, don't worry about it. We'll figure something out. So we did, and I did, and I taught 2 hours on the second day of this 2 hour workshop. And when I finished, I went, wow, it went really well. I went, it went really well. And I said, wow, this is what I want to do. This
Mm,
is my true north. This is what I'm here for.
yeah.
And so Larry was, in fact, the first positive influence leader that I experienced.
Mm,
He That changed the direction of my life. From then on, that I specialized in leadership training, development, and then into organization development as well. So that's what a positive influence leader does. And in this particular case, a particular type of positive influence leader, which, Alex, they see something in you that you don't see in yourself. Larry saw something in
absolutely.
me that I could do this. This little nerdy guy that was writing reports, he felt could get up in front of a class and teach something and be good at it. That there was something that I had not seen in myself. And
Right.
not only that, he positioned me to be successful.
Yeah. And not,
He
and
did.
I'll add to that, he actually, I mean, he put his money where his mouth was, literally, because
Yes,
he took you on the trip the next week. He didn't say, well, Glenn, I could see how you'd be good at that. Let's get you in some training and then we'll find a trip for you down the line.
right.
He was just like, let's do it. You want to do it? Let's do it, Glenn. And, I'll find a way to
Right.
justify the expenses. We'll make you teach. I can see you can do it. Let's go.
Right. And he didn't throw me in the deep end. He didn't say, well, it's a 2-day workshop. You know what? Why don't you teach the 2 days and I'll sit in the back and critique you?
Yeah. Yeah. That would have
No,
really been the deep end.
not,
That is
not,
true.
not good. Not good. So that's what a positive influence leader does. That's one of the things that they do.
Yeah.
And for me, that was profound because, as I said, it changed the direction
Yeah.
of my life and my career.
You
So,
found your calling. And,
yeah,
unfortunately, I think leaders like that are still the exception rather than the norm, because most people are trying to keep you in your box. Like, hey, Glenn's doing a great job of doing
right,
research and writing reports. We need someone to do that. Let's
right,
just have him keep doing it. But this boss back then, he, like you said, he saw the potential in you. He was open to the idea of developing you, and
right.
he immediately put you on that path. And I think, and that's phenomenal. I mean, really, to have that experience is phenomenal. And I know that a lot of that is what you are sharing in this book. So tell us about the book more. Like, why did you write it? And
Yes. Okay.
tell us what because the title is positive influence, right? And you talk about positive influence leaders, and I know that there's different ways, that there's different types of positive
Right.
influence leaders,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, see I thought I was kind of done with this writing thing, but a very I don't want to say an epiphany. It sounds like it's really, really too much. But I had an experience that I think that you and the audience can understand. Someone who I was quite close to passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And I got an invitation to come to the memorial for him. And I began to think about him and to think about his influence on me. And I realized that it was profound. This is somewhat later on in my career.
Mm-hmm.
He's someone who was a client of mine for over 20 years, which is a
That's
little
a deep
unusual.
relationship with a
You,
client. Yep.
as you know from your
Yep.
business, it's a
Mhm.
long time.
Yep.
So it started out as client consultant. He brought me in to establish teams in his organization because that's what I did. Um, and then it became morphed into a friendship, and I got to know him and his wife, and we socialized and we got to know each other. So it was quite an experience. I went to the memorial, talked to a lot of the people that I knew that worked in the organization, and I realized that how important he was to me. For example, this was another one, like Larry. Um, he, when I finished, the teams were set up, and I thought, pretty much done with this project. He said, I need to have some customer service training because a lot of my people, they have either direct contact with customers in the field. This was in telecommunications. Actually, it was part of Bell Labs. Some people remember that name from the telecommunications industry. They were a phenomenal organization. And they other people have it on the phone. They have customer contact. I said, Larry, I really don't know anything about customer service, but I'll find someone for you and bring it in. He said, you'll learn.
Right.
And so this fellow, his name was Bill. Um, Again, not like, unlike, just like Larry, no one was ever going to confuse either one of them with Tony Robbins. They weren't they weren't great motivational speakers, but
Right.
they got to the point. And he again saw something in me. He believed that I could do this. He believed that I could learn and bring it back in. And the reason he wanted me to do it in his organization, because he knew that I knew the organization
Mm,
and would tailor it to that organization and not just wouldn't be something that was taken off the shelf and
right.
just brought in. So I thought, I bet I cannot be the only person that's had these people in their lives that have been such a positive influence on them. And so I thought maybe there's a book there. So
Mhm.
I came home, and the first person I called was my son, Michael,
Mhm.
because not only does he work in corporate America, he actually works in financial services and has for 25 years. And he's also very well read on management and leadership, up on the latest literature. And I said to him, here's what I'm thinking about doing. I'm thinking about writing a book about positive influence. And he said, I'd read that book. I
Mm.
said,
Mm.
how'd you like to write that book with me? He said, so I
How about
said,
I co-opt you here? It's a little Tom Sawyer action. Oh, that
yeah,
looks like fun. Let me do
you think maybe I
it.
sucked him in there a little bit? I don't know.
Yeah.
So he said, "Oh, I would love to," and so that's how we got started on this journey. And then from there, we interviewed some 50 people, all different, a variety of jobs and in industries, occupations. More than half of them women, people of color, and we had a couple of doctors, a martial arts guru, a lead singer in a rock band, of course, many, many corporate people, um, nurses, all sorts of a variety of different people. We wanted the diversity, not the
Hmm.
diversity of race and gender and the like, but also of industry and occupation. And we
Yeah.
collected these incredible stories. And so, Alex, we were looking for a profile
Mm.
initially of what is it that a positive influence leader does, so that we could help people become positive influence leaders,
Right.
train people to become positive influence leaders.
Hmm.
And as we got into it, we realized that the responses we were getting were much more diverse than we had expected. And so what we found is that there's lots of different ways that you can be a positive influence leader. They're all of them helpful, but different. And
Yeah.
that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
So that was sort of part of our journey. And then Michael said at one point, Dad, I'm pretty sure that people who are benefited from positive influence would pay it forward, that they would be positive influence leaders with other people. And so we began to ask people about that. The other thing is that we didn't ask this initially, but people started saying to us, Glenn, don't you want to know about negative influences? And because I've had a lot of those.
Oh, yes. I think we all
and,
have had a lot of those, no
and
doubt.
so we started asking about, well, what about negative influences in your life? And we also said, how did you cope with those? And so
Mm,
we learned so much about coping skills that people develop to deal with negative influences in their
right.
life, in their career.
And having
So
that resilience. Yeah,
yeah, so
absolutely.
that all went into the book. And the last
Absolutely.
thing I'll say about it is that the book was supposed to be released in May of this year. The virus hit late February, early
Mhm.
March. We decided to put the release of the book on hold. And again, Michael said to me, Dad, why don't we think of this instead of as a problem, but as an opportunity?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so what that meant was we said, okay, let's see if we can apply what we think a positive influence leader does to a positive leadership in a time of crisis. And
Right.
so augmented the manuscript with a chapter on positive influence leaders in a time of crisis. And I think we have something important to say about that as well.
I love
I
that.
hope
I
that
love
wasn't
that.
too long.
No, I love that. The whole thing is fantastic. And I want to come back to that new chapter on crisis. But
Right.
just before we go there, tell us a little bit, because I think it's really important what you said, that you found lots of ways that people were positive influence leaders. There isn't one prescription, right? And I think that leadership often falls into this trap, especially if we want to become a better leader. It's like, well, how is such and such leading? Or how is that person leading? Or I should just, emulate this style or that style. And it's not about that. It's about finding your own style of leadership and what works for you. But I do know that you mentioned in the book, like there are you did find themes, right? You did find there were some specific thematic styles of positive leadership. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what those are, and how can our audience identify, like, oh, which one might I be, which one might I identify with most?
Okay, so what we found is that when we put all of the data together, that there's four different types or four different styles of positive influence leader,
Mm-hmm.
and you can be any one of these four and be a successful positive influence leader, but different
Mm-hmm.
than someone else. Now, some
Right.
people, and essentially what this is it's not so much a preference, but as this is the one that you use most often.
Mm-hmm.
And now people who know about psychological types, and I've done some study in that area as well, and that's originally Carl Jung's work on psychological types, in which he said we don't have one, we use many different types and styles. And so we found basically the same kind of thing. So we have four different types.
Mm-hmm.
We call them supportive, teacher, motivator, and role model. So
Mm-hmm.
the supportive positive influence leader is that person that says, I'm here for you. I got you. I got your back.
Mm-hmm.
I can help you. I'll support you. I believe in you. I won't do it for you, but I will help you do it. I will help you get around, under, over, or through that barrier.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, a woman we interviewed named Jennifer, she talked about her mother being a positive influence. Her mother was a history buff. She loved American history. She bought a house and redid it in the vein of the original era when that house was built. She
Mm-hmm.
found the exact paint and the light. She developed this incredible interest in history in Jennifer. And at one point, And she had convinced Jennifer to go major in American history. And at one point, she said to Jennifer, "Don't let anybody tell you you can't do something just because you've never done it before."
Hmm.
Let that one sink in.
Yeah.
Don't let anybody tell you you can't do something just because you've never done it before. And guess where Jennifer ended up? She is now a senior curator at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. She's
I
she's
love
living
it.
she's living the dream. She's living the dream.
Absolutely.
Betsy, and by
Absolutely.
the way, we interviewed a number of women of a certain age who found either for that society imposed certain things that they assumed that they could not do or were barred from. Um, and so Betsy, another woman we interviewed, went to college and she majored in theater. And she assumed that because being a woman, that the options that were available to her were acting, writing, directing. But the
Mm.
curriculum included a course in technical theater. So in this particular class, she met the teacher whose name was Jim. And at one point during the class, he said to her, "Betsy, I want you to go up on that ladder and string the lights across the top of the stage." If you ever been, this was a major theater,
Right.
and know how high that is?
That's very
Well,
high. I would not want
Betsy,
to do that. I have big fear of heights.
Betsy said, "Are you kidding?" She said, "I grew up in an apartment. We never even had a ladder in the house." And Jim said, "You can do this.
Mhm.
Betsy, you can do this, and you're going to do it, and I will be right here."
Yeah. So
She
he
got
was
up,
another supportive style leader.
supportive style leader. She got
Yeah.
up on that ladder, she strung those lights, and she said afterwards, "You know what? I learned how to use power tools. I built sets. I strung lights. I developed sound systems." And she said, "Yeah, I decided that that was the avenue I wanted to take." And
Mhm.
because of Jim being supportive of her. Anyway, the
I love it.
teacher, yeah, the teacher is that someone that teaches you the things you need to know in order to be successful. So
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a person that carries the title of teacher or instructor or professor.
Right.
Sometimes it's just someone in your life that you encounter that teaches you those particular things that you need to learn. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's values, sometimes it's learning right from wrong. What's the right thing to do? How do you do the right thing?
Yeah.
Uh, some people, you
Yeah.
know what that is.
Yeah. I've had a
So
few of those. I've had a
have you?
few of those teacher leaders in my life, and often they're not even teaching you about the job itself, right? So I had a way
No,
back when I worked at a cable news channel, and my boss there, she taught me how to take the edge off my elbows, which has certainly served me well in the rest of my career. So I was young, I was raw, I was very ambitious. I wanted to get ahead, and it was like, these people need to get out of my way. I've got work to do. And I didn't have any finesse at all. I didn't have a whole lot of emotional
yes,
intelligence back then. And she taught me that. And it wasn't my job, it wasn't anything technical, but she saw that, okay, this woman can go somewhere, but only if she learns these, quote unquote, soft skills. And they're not soft at all. They're so important.
right.
So
And you're-
I hear you on the teacher, and very often they're teaching you something that might not be directly what you're doing, but is so important to your path. Yeah.
Right. And of course, again, it's someone who doesn't carry the title of teacher.
Yeah. No, not at all. Mm-mm.
No, exactly. And a woman we interviewed named Leslie, she went back to school. She had a calling. She was working in corporate America. She wanted to be a teacher. She went back to school, and she was blessed because she found Professor Carlson, who not only taught her classroom techniques and the like, but he also brought an enthusiasm, an energy to it that said, this is how you teach. You got to bring something to it,
Yeah.
bring something really positive to the classroom. And she said that inspired me. And I learned that I not only wanted to learn how to be a teacher, I wanted to learn how to be a great teacher. And that's
There is a difference there.
the difference between being good and being competent and being skillful and being great. And guess what? What happened with Leslie? She 2 years ago was selected to be Teacher of the Year in New York City.
Whoa, that's fantastic.
You know how many teachers there are in New York City?
Right, that's a
Like
serious achievement.
10,000, and there were, I think, 20. There were 20 that were picked, and she was one of them.
That's
so
phenomenal.
That's So there's other stories like that. But I love the idea of being a teacher. My mom was a teacher. She was an elementary school teacher. Actually, was a kindergarten teacher. And believe it or not, since I went to a very small school in New Jersey, there was only one kindergarten teacher. And when I was in kindergarten, she was my teacher.
I love it.
So I had to learn how to call her Mrs. Parker in class.
Right.
Anyway, let's go on to talk about the motivating positive influence leader. That's the person that sees something in you that you didn't necessarily see in yourself. And that was Larry.
Right.
Coming back to Larry, he was that person that saw something in me and changed the direction. They're the person that helps you find your purpose, your, it's called your true north.
Yep.
And they are, incredibly important people in that regard. So let me go to the role model. The role model, we all know what role models are. Role models are those people that show you the way. You look to them and say, oh, that's how it's done. So you watch them. And the interesting thing about role models, and many people are role models to others without ever having met them.
Yes.
Am I not right? Yes. You see them, for example, Oprah Winfrey is a role model to many women because she's been so open and giving in terms of telling her story, that she's influenced a generation of women to believe that they can overcome so many barriers that are set up for them in their life. She has been that way.
Yeah.
I'm a big sports fan, so Michael Jordan is a role model to a whole generation of basketball players. And the thing about role models is that it's not necessarily that you want to copy them, but you want to pick certain things that they do that can be integrated into your personality and your style. For example, let's take Michael Jordan. The ones who really get this don't say, oh, I want to copy his jump shot exactly the way he does it. You know what what he models for them is a work ethic. And he's legendary for his work ethic.
Exactly.
Hours in the gym, thousands of foul shots, the same shot over and over and over again until he gets it. That's the kind of thing that a positive influence does. Now that comes down to, everyday life as well. There are role models that you encounter in, a person that we interviewed. His name is Dick. His first boss was a role model, and he watched him. He watched how he worked and how he interacted with people, and I began to take mental notes about how he did that. And he said to me, Glenn, one of the major things that distinguished him as a role model is that he walked the talk. What he said he was going to do, he did.
Yeah.
So that his words were very much aligned with his actions. And that is one of the critical components of being a role model. So those are the 4 styles. And you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I just wanted to add to the role model one because, I think I'm glad you provided the everyday example, because yes, we can look to the celebrities and you know, the athletes and the successful business people like Oprah, you know, Steve Jobs, whatever. I mean, those certainly are role models, but they're happening in everyday life too. And we talk about this a lot on the show, that as leaders, we need to be mindful that whether we realize it or not, we are role models and we're having an impact on people without even, you know, being cognizant of it. And so to become more self-aware of that is going to help us become better leaders, because it's like, well, if someone's watching me, if I have a team and they're watching me how I do all this, do I want to be a positive role model and set a positive example? Or do I want them to remember me for what not to do, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And we're talking positive. Yes.
Exactly. We want positive.
And
You
there's a
can be a
lot
role
of them.
model in a negative way too.
And there's a lot of them in everyday life.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And that's what we found. We
Yeah.
brought in the famous people just to sort of spice up the story a little bit, because there's some of them, but actually putting the two together, I'll tell you this one real quick. Erin, a person that I know quite well, she went through a period where she had breast cancer and she was treated for it, and she you know, it was a difficult time for her. And while she was home, she would watch television, and she'd watch Good Morning America, and she would watch Robin Roberts, who had gone through her
Yes.
own bout with breast cancer.
Sure.
And she said it gave her hope watching her, because she could go on with her life. She talked about it very openly, but she went on doing her thing. Listen to this story, Alex, when you want to talk about moments in life. Erin lives in New York City. She's walking down the street in Manhattan, and she gets to a corner and she looks across the street, and she sees Robin Roberts.
Yeah.
And she
Meant to
said,
be.
oh my God, what am I going to do? She said, I'm going to stop. And she stopped. She told her what what she had done for her. And Robin Roberts, she said, she took her glasses off, looked at her and said, thank you very much for sharing that story with me. And she gave her a big hug.
Yeah.
I want I yeah, I choke up when I hear
I
that
love
story,
that.
but
I know.
that
Yeah.
she was so real in, you know,
Mhm.
in just as she was. But anyway,
Yeah.
I know
Well,
but
and
I
that's
want
the
to
thing.
share that.
Sometimes we don't even realize we're having an impact, and then someone just on the street comes up
Yeah,
to us and says, and
yeah,
that's really meaningful for that person who is
right,
a role model. Yeah.
right,
So how do our listeners determine their
right.
style of
Yes.
positive influence leadership?
So that's a great question. So obviously you can read the descriptions, which are, you know, in much more detail with a lot more examples. But what we did is we created a self-assessment survey instrument, and that's in the back of the book. So you
Hmm.
can fill out the instrument. It's very quick. There's only 18 items. You self-score it, and you get scores for all 4 styles. So
Mm,
the one that where you have the highest score, and some of you may be familiar with Myers-Briggs and other self-assessment surveys, your highest score is what we call your primary style. That's the one you use most frequent,
yeah.
that you're probably good at, that people know you, that can identify that. But you do have the ability to use the strengths of all 4 of those styles.
Yeah.
And you do. And what we think of as the transformational positive influence leader is that person who easily and fluidly is able to move from one style to the next as you or the situation requires it. So
Right.
they can be situational. That's what
Hmm.
the transformational leader is. They do what is necessary,
Yeah.
because go back to my example with Larry. If Larry had been supportive and he'd get, Glenn, I'm with you. You can
Hmm.
do this.
Right.
Um, I will, you know, I'll do this, I'll do that, but you can do it, Glenn. Wouldn't have worked.
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
did what I needed at that time. And that's what the great positive influence leaders do. They do what you need at the very time that you need it.
Yeah.
There you
Yeah, and
go.
that's such an important point, right? Is that you're not locked into a specific style. And there's overlap in these styles too,
Yes,
right? Because I mean, I could be a motivational leader and also be a role model at the same time. I mean, they work together, they complement one another. And yeah, like you said, that you might have a primary style, but you can call on these other styles as needed. I think that's terrific. Um,
exactly.
so let's circle back to the new chapter that you put in the book, because, of course, life has changed a lot. I mean, leaders are just challenge, challenge, challenge. I mean, 2020 has just been one after another, right? So what did you discover? I mean, were you able to apply what you had previously learned into this new world that we have?
Yes.
Or did you, discover other things? Tell us about that.
It definitely applies. And so we came up with 5 ways that positive influence leaders function effectively in a time of crisis. And I
Mhm.
kind of want to run down
Sure.
that for you and for your listeners. One is to be open and authentic.
Mhm.
Here's what I know now, and here's what we're going to do now.
Mhm.
But I need you to understand that we're operating in a very unusual and confusing time, and things may change going forward. But as soon as I know, you will know. So I'm going to be as transparent, as open, as authentic as I can be, um, and recognize that things may change. I want to. I'm sure you know most people know who Mark Cuban is. Mark Cuban is
Of
an
course.
investor, an entrepreneur. He's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks
Mhm.
professional basketball team. He's on Shark Tank. That's why most people probably know him now. He said back in March of this year, he said, what you do now will define, or what you do during this period now will define your brand for decades.
Amen.
Will define
Mhm.
your brand for decades, because people have good memories. He said, especially young people,
Mhm.
millennials and the like, they will remember what you did during this time, how you
Mhm.
treated your employees, how open you were, how real you were, because
Yep.
people figure that out. Are you the real deal or not? So that's
Mhm.
number one. Number two, it's to be clear and specific. It's confusing times. And what the thing that we're going through right now is has a medical and scientific basis to it. So it's kind of information that we're not as familiar with dealing with. But by the way, the next crisis could be just as complicated. And one of
Mhm.
the things that we say is that the positive influence, one of the most important things that a positive influence leader can do during a time of crisis is to plan for the next crisis. There'll be
Yes.
one. We
Yeah.
hope and pray that it won't be as terrible as this one is, and with such great loss of life,
Right.
but maybe something else. It may be a product recall. It may
Yeah.
be um,
Hey, if
some sort
2020
of
has taught us anything, it's that the unthinkable can happen. So,
exact.
we got to
So
prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Yeah.
exactly. So being clear and specific, because it may be a legal crisis that is also very confusing. So
Mhm.
um, um, the role model here, in terms of somebody can be clear and specific in explaining complex scientific and arcane medical information to the rest of us who are not scientists but need to know that information, for me, is Dr. Anthony Fauci. He is the one
Mhm.
that can take that information, put it into a plain language that I can understand.
Right.
Third thing is to be able to listen, to ask questions, to listen some more, and to respond.
Mm-hmm.
The people, the positive influence leaders listen to what employees are saying, what customers are saying, and they're responding to those. They're open to questions. They're accessible. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
they're holding Zoom meetings and all hands meetings and the like, and people can do those kind of things and yet still not be accessible. They are people that will openly encourage questions. I want to know how this is working out. How is working from home working out? Are you
Right.
able to do it? Is the technology working for you? What is it
Mm-hmm.
like with having your spouse home, your children home? How
Right.
is that working? All I want to know that, and I want to know what we can do to help respond and make this effective and successful to you. What about
Mm-hmm.
collaboration? What about onboarding new employees? All these kinds of questions need to be answered. The fourth thing is back to walk the talk, being authentic during this particular period of time, that your words are aligned with what you say. Because
Mm-hmm.
during this time, everybody's watching. They're watching what you say, they're watching what you do, and they want to
Yeah.
make sure that those things are aligned. It's very critical in a crisis situation that you have that particular alignment. And the last thing, which may be the most important thing, is to conduct, you can call it lots of different names. We call it an after action review. Because again, coming back to the most important thing perhaps you can do during this time is to plan for the next crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What did we learn? So the after
Right.
action review basically says, okay, before we go back to whatever, and I like to talk about not necessarily the good old days, but the better new days, um, is to say, let's take a look at what happened during this period. What worked, what didn't
Mm-hmm.
work, what
Right.
did we do well, what did we not do so well,
Right.
what did we learn from this period,
Right.
what are
What can
some
we do better next time? Right.
what did we do, um, what did we do during this time that worked especially well that we
Mm-hmm.
might incorporate in the going forward
Yep.
workplace?
Yep.
You know, do we all need to be in the office every day?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, I don't know. Why don't we figure out how that is and how that worked out? So asking that question, how did we do and what did we learn? And not only from the standpoint of productivity and collaboration and so forth, but how was it for you emotionally? How was it for you
Mm-hmm.
psychologically during this time?
Yeah.
Um, how did you feel, and what could we do differently and better next time in order to make it um, make the next crisis not as bad? Now, a lot of people point to little Taiwan. Okay, it's a small island, it's very contained, but they had a terrible time with SARS. And when that ended and they got over that and past that, before they moved on, they sat down and said, what did we learn? And guess what? Boy, they handled the COVID-19 so well. I understand
Mm-hmm.
people say, oh, it's not a good example, they're very small, but you can learn from small examples and perhaps integrate that into a larger situation.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
all right,
Absolutely.
so those are the five things.
Yeah, and I love that. And so much of those five are basically, they're like based in communication and that need, like the first one, be open and authentic. The second one, be clear and concise. The third one, ask questions and listen, right? All three of those are in communication.
Right,
And then the fourth one was more action oriented in terms of, hey, make sure the words that still the words you're communicating align with the actions, right?
right,
And the fifth one, there's even communication in there because we're asking, okay, what did we do well? What did we not do so well? What can we learn? How can we apply this? But we're also asking for feedback in the process. Like you said,
right,
how did it make you feel? Do we need to do this moving forward? You're still eliciting feedback and being that open communicator as the leader. I mean, phenomenal, really terrific,
That's
actionable
exactly.
information, Glenn. I love
That's
it.
exactly. Yeah, because we're practitioners, and so we write for action to take place. We're not writing for for some sort of academic purpose. We want organizations to be better. We want leaders to be better. So that's our particular focus. So
I love it. And I love that you have brought that focus and your expertise and your wisdom and, hey, the research you found, like what you found in writing this book and sharing with us those 4 types, the supportive, the teacher, the motivating, and the role model. I mean, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation and packed full of actionable, as you said, you're practitioners. So this is all actionable. People can go out there and do it right now. So I know that, I mean, we barely scratched the surface here. I know you have so much more wisdom to share, and the book is jam-packed full of amazing techniques and methods. So I know our listeners are going to want more. How can they get in touch with you, Glenn? And I think also you have a cool offer to share with them too, right?
yeah. So before I get to that, I just want to realize that the survey that I mentioned is going to be published separately in a booklet form, so it'll make it a lot easier to use in staff meetings and in leadership and training, leadership and individual
That's the
development.
self-assessment for the leadership style.
Self-assessment.
Yep,
There's
got
also
it.
going to be a second booklet that'll be a 360 version of it, so you can
Fantastic.
involve other people, and there's going to be a third booklet which will be the how to use this in leadership and team development. There'll be examples and designs and tips and all that sort of stuff that you would expect from a leader's guide.
Mm-hmm.
So you asked about how to get more information. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. We've been posting all kinds of interesting aspects of positive influence on LinkedIn. There's a website called thepositiveinfluenceleader.com, www.thepositiveinfluenceleader.com, where you can get more information. There's blogs there, there's articles that have been published, there's a recording of a webinar, lots of information. You also can communicate with us via the website. So you could reach me at Glenn, it's GLENN, at thepositiveinfluenceleader.com. And I welcome hearing your stories, because we're actually going to be creating a blog about positive influence stories from people that we've encountered in sessions like this. So I encourage you to send me an email with your personal experience as with a positive influence leader in your life that made a difference in your life. So here's my offer, okay? We talk about paying it forward, and we didn't get a chance to spend a lot of time on that, but positive influence leaders pay it forward. So here's my offer. If you buy a copy of our book on Amazon, and tell me that you did, I will send you a complimentary copy of the book signed, that I will sign, so that when you now have 2 books, so you can gift the first book to a friend, a business colleague. You can in fact pay it forward. So I'm going to give that offer to the first 5 people that send an email to me at that address that I just gave you, with, of course, your mailing address. So you send it to Glenn at thepositiveinfluenceleader.com, and the first 5 that I receive telling me that they have bought a copy of the book and they would like a complimentary signed copy will go right out to you.
Oh, I love that. And
Thanks
so it's really a hard copy. This is a very, very generous offer, because usually when people do this, it's like, yeah, I'll send you a free version of my book, but you get the digital, right? And then it's like, I want the hard copy. I want to have it. So this is, hey, take Glenn up on his offer. Glenn at thepositiveinfluenceleader.com. Email him. It is the honor system, and you are all positive leaders listening to this. So we know if you say you bought the book, on Amazon. Glenn, is it available there?
Yes, it is.
Yep. So go get it on Amazon and then let him know so you can get your signed copy mailed to you and enjoy that as well. So fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for that very generous offer and for the intention behind it. I love the pay it forward philosophy, and I love how you are spreading the positive influence leadership by doing this as well. So thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for the opportunity. I love talking with you.
Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure having Glenn on today. I hope you got as much value and fun from it as I did. And remember, you can connect with him at glenn@thepositiveinfluenceleader.com. I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us for another episode. And if you have positive leadership stories, or you have questions about this week's topic, or you weren't able to grab Glenn's email fast enough, that's okay. I can connect you to him too. You can always write to me at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you and what you have to share. All right, that's it for this week. This is Alex Bratty signing out and thanking you for being part of the positive leadership movement and inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.